I'm Iris Muller. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and a proud mom of 2 children, one of whom has quadriplegic cerebral palsy and is nonverbal.
And I'm Alma Schneider, a licensed clinical social worker and the proud mom of 4 children, one of whom has Prader-Willi syndrome.
In this podcast, we discuss the uncensored truth about raising kids with disabilities.
Prepare to laugh, cry, and hopefully learn something new. This is Two Moms, No Fluff. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Two Moms, No Fluff. I'm Alma Schneider, and I am here today not with my partner, Iris Miller, but with my good friend and partner in disability crime in Montclair, Nina Nsilo-Swai. And we're going to be talking about another perspective on autism today. So I met Nina years ago at our parenting group, but I'm going to let Nina introduce herself to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nina, and I am a mom in Montclair, New Jersey. I have 2 sons, an 18-year-old with autism and a 15-year-old who is a neurotypical child. I live in Montclair with my husband, and I met Alma probably 12 years ago when I was a parent living in New York City who discovered a school in New Jersey. And I managed to get my child into an out-of-district placement, and I drove my son to school every day from Manhattan to New Jersey. And I did that for 2 years, and then we decided we were going to move here.
Yeah, so I was from the first time I met you, Nina, I was so blown away that you were going to those lengths to have your son be in the appropriate place. And it's amazing that in all of New York City, you could not find that place, and you found the place here in New Jersey. Well, thank you for speaking with us. I have some interesting questions for you. Feel free to delve in as much as you like or give as little information as possible. I know that these kind of interviews are a little tough because you are talking about your child. So, when it's out there, this is for the purpose of educating other people in the community, but also to show people that they are not alone, people who have children with disabilities, as you know, but also for the greater community and people who want to be allies to the disability community. So that doesn't mean we have to sacrifice all of our privacy for that. So whatever you feel comfortable with. I would love for you to describe your son, and we don't have to use his name, it's up to you, but if you want to describe what he's like in your own words.
Okay. So our son, Kibo, is 18 years old. He is the first word that comes to mind always is affectionate and loving. He's always been super huggy, super, charming, smiley, which was always the confusion when he was initially diagnosed, because everyone thought, well, kids with autism have no emotions. They have no affect. They don't care about who's in the room. But he was always a kid that loved hugs, loved affection. And to this day, I can't tell you how many pictures I have of him, like grabbing his brother to his body, smushing him and hugging him. He's a big fan of Alma's. I mean, big fan. He is verbal. He is very active. He loves all things sort of activity. So jumping on trampolines, riding bikes, scooters, swimming. He loves swimming. He loves the beach. He's a kid that likes to be outside. He's always had good balance. He likes hikes and climbing. But he is very much a child with autism. He has his moments where he has behaviors. He has a really hard time with transitioning from activities, or if there's something unexpected, he can have a real struggle with that. Fortunately, he doesn't have any health issues. Doesn't have to deal with things like seizures, which some teenagers with autism have. He doesn't have any other sort of medical issues, which we're fortunate for. He's a good sleeper, which we're fortunate for. So, there's the highs, there's the not so highs. But he, for a long time, you feel like your child is super unique. There are so many things about him that are very much a child with autism. And then there are things about him that are very much a child. So it's a good combination of all of that. He's verbal, as I said, and so he's able to express his wants and desires, but he's not the kind of kid that's going to tell you a long story about what happened today or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, that's in a nutshell is Yeah. Yeah.
And he is, I can attest to the fact that he is super affectionate. He is the sweetest. He's like a teddy bear. I love that he loves to hug me. And I'm sure that that is not always a good quality as a kid gets older. I know that that can cause some issues. Has that caused any issues for you with strangers or for people that might not want to be touched?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, as a child, I'm biased, but he was a beautiful little baby and he was a beautiful toddler and a child. And so if he went up and hugged a stranger, oh, who's this cute little child?
Mm-hmm.
He's also a Black boy and he is now 18. He's about 5'10". He's over 200 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Strangers don't take to this person just randomly hugging him, So that is, his safety is a concern.
Yeah.
Because people, make judgments pretty quickly. Even, my husband is a small guy and he's white. And so a big Black child and his father and the height difference and the visual racial difference, my child is mixed race,
Mm-hmm.
it can startle people out in public. And that concerns me. That concerns me because he can make jerky motions or he can stim. And if you don't understand it and you're seeing it from across the street and he's talking to his father, who is a foot, almost, not a foot shorter, but significantly shorter, it can be startling to outsiders. And it does scare me sometimes about his safety and how people perceive him in public because of his size and the fact that Black boys aren't given the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. How do you deal with that? Like if he's approaching someone, or has someone ever said anything that has made you pause, or that where you have to respond?
We are very, he's the child that will never be out in public on his own. He's always going to be with a parent or with a caregiver. So I always hope that will sort of give people the understanding that this is not a typical individual, neurotypical individual. We've definitely been in places where, we've gotten a look or a glance, and then the person takes that extra step and says, oh, wait a second, this is a person with a disability.
Right.
He's never grabbed anybody randomly in public. With friends, we've worked a lot with him to say, you have to ask for a hug. We teach him actively, both in school and at home, the best ways to be out in public so that we don't have those experiences. Yes, you can hug your brother, you can hug your friend Alma, but you can't hug a random person in the supermarket just because you think they're pretty,
Right.
So yeah, we've been fortunate to not have any, bad interactions with people in public beyond glances and stares.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay. And I noticed that you use the term your son who has autism. I know there's a lot of talk in the disability community, in the autistic community, about saying my autistic son, because it's an inherent part of who they are. What are your thoughts on that as the parent of a son who has autism?
So it's been interesting because we've been in this game. He's 18 now.
Yeah.
So we've been in this game for a while, right? So when we first started on this whole journey, he was diagnosed with what's called PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disability, not otherwise specified. It's a big mouthful to say, we don't know what's going on. So that was his diagnosis for a little bit. And then when he was very young in elementary school, it was, he's a child with autism. Told not to say he is autistic, because you don't say, I'm a cancer, you say, I have cancer, I'm a person living with cancer. So that was the thinking then. And then, autism became much more of a condition that people spoke about. And there was autism pride, and they were very advanced people with autism saying, this is not a disability, this is not something to change, we are proud of who we are autistic people. So my language may go all over the place, and I honestly believe that people should identify as they choose to identify. I am neither offended nor, overcorrecting with individuals. If you want to say you're an autistic person, sometimes I say my child is autistic, depends on who I'm talking to and what point I'm trying to get across. If I'm at the airport and I want to get to the front of the security line, I might say I have an autistic child, but sometimes I say my child with autism. It all depends, on who I'm speaking to and the language. I don't feel personally strongly about where the language goes, but if somebody says that they don't want me to say, and I'm directly offending them and they want to be referred to as an autistic person, my son has not said either way. He doesn't have that cognitive ability to be speaking about himself in that way. So I'll go either way. I'm not offended if somebody says your son is autistic or he has autism. It doesn't offend me. And from what I'm seeing from my son, I don't think he's offended by it either.
Okay.
But again, I respect everyone else's choices.
Okay. What, have you ever been in a situation where someone says you shouldn't say your son has autism? Has it been kind of the other way around where you are being schooled by someone who has autism or who identifies as autistic?
I have not. I feel like,
there's a
yeah,
lot of online stuff like that.
yeah. I feel like when I was more active in autism forums online, especially when he was younger and I was looking for answers, I had a lot of people tell me that I shouldn't say he has PDD-NOS, which is what he was diagnosed with at the time. And I used to say, well, that's what I was told, and I don't know if I should be calling him autistic if the doctors haven't told me that that's his diagnosis.
Okay.
So, but I haven't been told the other way. I haven't been told by an autistic adult that I should change my language.
Okay, because I've just seen a lot of kind of infighting, I'll just use the term infighting online with people who have low support need in their language and cognitive abilities, getting very offended. So I'm just curious if you've encountered that, but it says not you haven't. So at this point,
I mean, I think one thing you always hear in the autism community is that if you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So that
right.
tells you that there's a range of experiences right. and challenges and skill sets. So if that's the case, why can't there be a range of ways that we describe these people? That's how I feel. And so again, if John wants to be called an autistic person, whenever I speak to John, I will call him an autistic person. If Sarah wants to be called a person with autism, that's what I'll do. That's where I am with it.
How about the term severe autism? Is that a term that I've been seeing that term around a lot? And there's a big debate about that as well. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I know in the new DSM, they changed how they deal with autism. So there's no longer Asperger's, which was a diagnosis that people had. And those were people who were more highly skilled in terms of their cognitive abilities, their verbal abilities, their social abilities, and they were termed Asperger's. And then people who perhaps were nonverbal, needed a lot of care, they were called autistic. And so for a while, there was that division. And now everything is sort of, I think it's level 1, level 2, level 3, and they use that kind of language. I am so far, well, I'm much further into the game, 18 years in, sort of my battles are different from what they were when my son was 5. So I've ridden the roller coaster. So I've had months when things were severe and I've had months when things were mild. And so what I think about when I think about those descriptions is, this is a child who is more independent than another child, or this is a child that is more verbal than another child. That it's severe, not a severe, moderate, I always say my son is somewhere in the middle, but pick a day. Some days.
Exactly. And in the different areas of life. Very high support need in walking across the street, but very low support need in figuring out how to use a computer or something like that.
Exactly. So, I've met kids who are high, they're deemed, not, what is it? Not high need, low,
Low support
highly
need.
Or low support need, but they're also, bedwetters. So, I mean, so it's all over the place. And I think that everybody tries to sort of, we're human beings, we categorize each other. There's hierarchies, unfortunately, in everything. So I think people try to sort of define where they are on the spectrum with those terms, but I don't think they're that helpful because your kid needs what your kid needs. And whether they're deemed severe or not severe, they still need, if they need that speech therapy, they need that speech therapy. You know what I mean? So again, it's really, I sort of go with where people feel they need,
Yeah, it sounds like you're more of a go with the flow. Like you've dealt with all you, like you said, we've both been in this game a long time, and things
Yeah.
that perhaps bothered you earlier are not bothering you as much because you got bigger fish to fry. So
Exactly.
people figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some people are very adamant about it, and very adamant about, particular language always being used. So it's always interesting to hear, different people's perspectives on it, and parents. And a lot of people might be saying that I shouldn't even be talking to a parent about their child with autism, because that parent, shouldn't have a say, because their child is, the one who should be talking for themselves.
Right.
My personal belief is that parents, it's a separate category, parents of children with disabilities, and we have our needs and our preferences as well as our children do. So,
Right.
you know,
I mean, and again, I always look at it when I think about a child with cancer or a much more sort of accepted, acknowledged medical need. The
mhm,
parent does have input.
yes,
Parent does have a say. I mean, I'm not sure your 7-year-old is going to be able to have a well versed explanation about the kind of treatment they want for their, cancer. They
yeah,
just, you as a parent have to make some decisions.
yeah,
And then you make your decisions and you have to be okay with them,
mhm,
And if you make a mistake, guess what? You can make another decision tomorrow.
that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think people often put a lot of stock in that decision, being afraid that now we've, done something horrible. A lot of this is really trial and error, unfortunately, because we don't know exactly what our children need at that moment, and we have to play around a little bit. That's
What I always say is everything works until it doesn't.
exactly,
So
exactly.
that's,
It's like medication,
yep.
So
Yep.
it's one medication that seems amazing. We might have to change it down the road and then try something new. Another question for you: has Kibo ever done ABA therapy?
Yes, he has.
Okay,
Yes,
and
he has.
what are your thoughts on ABA? And I ask because I know that there's a lot of debate about the usefulness of it, the fact that it's that some adults, some autistic adults, feel that it was abusive. So a lot of parents are afraid to use it for their children. A lot of parents say it's the only thing that's worked for their children. I'm wondering what your feelings about it, and if you could describe a little bit for people who don't know what ABA is.
Okay, so yes, again, taking it 18 years into the game,
Hmm.
I okay, ABA is applied behavioral analysis, and it's a process where if you're trying to teach a child a skill, you break it down into several steps
Hmm.
and you work with the child to master each step of the skill. And at each step, they're given a reward for completing that step. Okay. So, for example, like let's take potty training because I did a lot of work in that. So, your first step is your child being able to dress and undress themselves.
Hmm.
Okay. And once they're able to pull down their pants and pull them up, and each time you're giving them a reward for that activity, once they progress from that activity, now you're going to teach them to sit on the potty for 3 minutes. And you're going to run that program until they're able to successfully sit on the potty for 3 minutes. So now you've got 2 sets of the skill. And now and you just keep building until you get to the point where the child is eliminating and they're flushing. And it's a step-by-step process. And for each step, there's data taken on whether the kid could complete the step or could not complete the step. And yes, it can be very regimented and very sort of from the outside eye, from the neurotypical eye, looks very boring, looks very rote, looks very robotic. Okay.
Hmm.
I've had bad ABA and I've had fantastic ABA. And to me, at this point in our journey, I think that yes, bad ABA that turns your kid into this robot that responds a certain way to a certain thing and that is hopefully going out of favor.
Hmm.
It's not the ideal way. I had a tremendous dynamic ABA at a program here in New Jersey, which is the reason I drove back and forth for 2 years,
Hmm.
where it's really just a process of teaching these children, our children, how to learn different skills.
Hmm.
Kids with autism, I don't know, there's some number where it takes the neurotypical child, several hundred trials before they master a skill.
Hmm.
Whereas it takes the child with autism thousands of times.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's that constant repetition. It's breaking things down into steps and
Hmm.
it's teaching step by step. That's what I view ABA as. And that's how it was when it was most successful with my child. That's how it was done for him. And it was done in a way that was much more, I want to say much more socially engaged and person to person versus somebody sitting here with a clipboard and writing things down and looking at you. And that was how it was done in the past. And they did used to use things like, unfortunately, they used to use in the past, not with my child, things like physical punishment, things like taking away desired items, things like that, that definitely were not the best. Okay? They were not ideal. And there are some kids that were absolutely traumatized by that. If you're looking for ABA, you want to look for a therapist that knows how to do it in a dynamic fashion where they're really interacting with your child. I don't want you sitting there with your note clip, and that's not the way it needs to be done.
Right.
Okay? If your teacher can't spend 30 minutes with your child and then write notes afterwards, I don't know that that's the best ABA. Your teacher should be skilled enough to be doing it and interacting, and it's, so that they're getting the information they need, because ABA really depends on that data to show and to graph that this is there's uptick and there's success and it's working. You don't have to have that rigid data. What you want to see is
progress.
Progress. And for the neurotypical kids, they get quizzes, they get exams, they get their grades, and that's how they're judged, right? So that's how the 4 years of really great ABA that we had was, it was the best thing for my child. I mean, when he started at this school, he was very echolalic, which means he couldn't engage in conversation because he thought conversation just meant repeating what the other person said. They broke that in 3 months. So how could I say that ABA didn't help him? You know, so many things. But then, just like I said, everything works until it doesn't work.
Right.
4 years, it was no longer really the best mode of education for him. But the idea of breaking things down into small steps, celebrating when things are accomplished, and building on that to have the final skill.
Yeah. Positive.
That's my neurotypical kid too. You know what I mean? So yes, I think bad ABA is bad. And I'm really hoping that we're moving towards a point where people are understanding better ways to do things. They're understanding that, yes, you're not supposed to be using physical force. You're not supposed to be taking things away from children and punishing them because they don't understand or can't complete a task. Because the bottom line is, you can't fault any human being for not understanding. Okay? And so, well, we have to do it. We have to try it again. We have to try something different. We can move on to another task and come back. You don't have to be so rigid where it's like, we're not gonna move on from this moment until he masters this skill. If this skill is hard, let's move on to something else and come back to this two months later. Maybe he'll get it then, or maybe she'll get it then.
And I'm very interested in this topic only because there is a school of thought that there should be zero ABA, that it should be abolished. It's harmful, it's abusive, but it sounds like you've had positive and negative, and that it served its purpose for you.
And great education for kids with autism.
And your son, I want to say for your son.
Right. Is a combination. It's a little bit of ABA, it's a little bit of Greenspan, which is more of a floor time, direct, get down to, not down to their level, so to speak, but get involved in where the child's interests are. So if it's Thomas the Tank Engine, we're going to talk about that. We're going to do activities with Thomas the Tank Engine, but you can weave some structural learning into that as well. It can be, it's just like in schools with our neurotypical kids. Some kids are visual learners, some kids are artists. If you can weave all different modes of education with any child, you're going to get a better outcome. But the old days, it used to be, oh, are you doing ABA? Oh, are you doing floor time?
Either or.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be either or. And I'm really hoping that we're seeing some more sort of, meshing of different modes of teaching for our kids, because it always works better. Yeah. You're able to be fluid.
Yeah. And so along those lines, I know that Kibo has been in out of district private schools, and he's been in the Montclair School District. So what has been your experience with Kibo and his progress with inclusion versus, I'm not sure if he was in a contained classroom, but the different levels of inclusion that he's experienced. Can you just speak to that a little bit and what's
Kibo has always been in self-contained classrooms in the public school district. And for our son, that was the best choice for him, because it wasn't just about him being able to function in a sort of general educational setting,
Mhm.
neurotypical kids. I was also concerned with how disruptive he could be to other children in the classroom if he wasn't in a classroom where all teachers involved had special education background.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So for us, the best place for him when he was in public schools was in a self-contained classroom. There were opportunities for inclusion, but quite honestly, most of those opportunities were, here's music class, there's Kibo sitting in the back.
Mhm.
But he was, if you're saying he's in the room, he was included. But
Mhm.
he wasn't really engaged
Right.
with the activity as an equal participant in that class. So my experience with inclusion in our school district was not great. It wasn't harmful. It just wasn't anything to really chat about.
So I guess, playing devil's advocate, some people feel that it's unacceptable to be because they liken it to segregation when kids are in a contained class. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, until you've really experienced it, I am not about putting a square peg into a round hole. Okay. I could have pushed and pushed and pushed to have him in a gen ed setting with peers in a class of 24 kids with an aide. It would have been so hard for him. He would have been too distracted. There would have been too much going on. I don't think he would have been successful.
Mhm.
I don't think he would have been
Do you
successful.
think there are ways that the classrooms could have made it more inclusive with him being there? There could have been supports or accommodations put in place. I'm trying to get a sense of how how people are making these choices because the resources aren't available, or because they truly feel that it's not the best, that you don't want to put the square peg into the round hole. The question for a lot of people is, well, let's make the round hole be better able to fit the square Kibo, the square. So what are your thoughts and feelings about that as a mom of a kid who's autistic?
I don't, I wanted our son to have an educational experience that was beneficial to him,
Okay.
not beneficial to what my idea of what his educational experience should be like,
Mhm.
what he needed. Okay. So for what he needed, he did not need to be in a classroom with 24 children doing his age level classwork, because
Mhm.
this was a child that didn't learn to read until he was probably 10 or 12,
Mhm.
right until
Yeah.
that age.
Yeah.
So he was working on those skills for all that entire time. I do not believe he would have learned to read sooner if he was in a gen ed classroom. I think
Mhm.
that's a fallacy. I think that each child is going to develop at their own pace.
Mhm.
Okay. And I have another child who's neurotypical, who's in gen ed classrooms. And there have been children in his classrooms that are kids with IEPs, kids with special needs. And there have been situations where, from the stories that I've heard from my child, that child, the child who was included in the classroom
Mhm.
wasn't really part of the classroom.
Mhm.
They were getting their education on the side, but
Mhm.
they were in the room. Or if they had behaviors, it wasn't handled in a way that was sensitive to the child who was struggling.
Right.
And the children who were there, it certainly wasn't explained to them.
Mhm.
There wasn't a true inclusive nature. And I think for kids with special education needs,
Mhm.
every parent has to make the decision based on what they think the child will best serve the child,
Mhm.
not from an ethical standpoint. Not, I will always fight for inclusion. I believe it's absolutely important. And
Mhm.
I believe there are absolutely children who are differently abled who can succeed in inclusion settings.
Mhm.
But there has to be an option for kids who cannot. And
Mhm.
my kid could not have thrived in a classroom of 24 children, going at the speed of a general ed classroom, learning at his peer level. He was delayed enough that he just wouldn't have been able to keep up, and he would have been miserable.
Yeah.
He would have been miserable and possibly disruptive, and that also would get at his own self-confidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a complex decision. And I think every parent that believes in inclusion should absolutely try it for their child and see what happens.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to cry uncle when it's not working.
Yeah, yeah,
And-
and hope and continue working towards inclusion so that those supports can be in place so that everyone can be together. But right now, they're not there.
They're
Um,
not there.
Yeah, they're not there. So we just have a few minutes left. I'm wondering two things. You mentioned that you have concerns about the fact that Kibo is a tall, big Black boy who has autism. What are your what would you like to see in society to allay your concerns for the future? Is there anything that you, I mean, I'm sure you've given this thought, but how do you prepare him and your family for, potential problems in society? You
Well,
mentioned that you talk to him about you can't go up to people. Are there any other things that you do or that you're concerned of?
I mean, it's so hard, honestly, and there are times when I'm terrified. Racism is a stain on this in this country, in this world, and racism plus ableism, doesn't make things any better.
Mhm.
I feel like it's a real challenge to begin with because again, Black people, Black men are not given the benefit of the doubt. So it's always like you must be doing something wrong, you must be a criminal, you must be a danger. I mean, I can't change how he is, so the society has to change. You talk a lot about being out in the world. Our community is fantastic. So many people know him in town. My younger son's friends know him. Having our presence be known, is a huge piece. But there are programs with police where they talk about registering your son. I have a problem with that. Why do I have to register my son with the police? Why can't the police take a beat before saying that my Black child is a criminal or is doing something terrible? It's hard. Honestly, I don't have great answers. I'm in a Facebook group about mother autism in Black, I believe it's called. I can't remember, but it's Black families who have autism as part of their makeup. It's a hard thing, and I don't have the answer, and it scares me. I've heard tricks like, if you're traveling at airports, make sure that someone is wearing a t-shirt that has an autism slogan on it so that people can quickly see, oh, this is a family with autism.
Yeah.
And I get all of that, but the society needs to change. We all need to be accepting of even people on crutches who are walking slow.
Yeah.
Like the ableism in the world in general is a struggle, and then adding racism to the pie it's really hard.
Yeah.
Hard. So
Oh.
friends, family, advocacy. That's what I try to do, but it's so much bigger than.
Yeah, we all have to be doing it, and not just people who have children with disabilities, and or people who have disabilities themselves.
Right.
All right. Well, last but not least, what would you tell a parent who has just gotten a diagnosis of autism for their child? What would be your biggest, if you could tell them one or two things, what would they be?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is your child is the child you loved yesterday before you had the diagnosis. Love your child. You are their parent, and that is a mistake that I made early in our journey. You are their parent, not their teacher. Your job is to love them. Your job is to create a home where they feel safe, where they feel comfort. Be their mom, be their dad. Okay? You hire teachers, hire therapists, but you are their mom. And sometimes teachers and therapists will say, go home and do this. No, you're their mom. So you can be their mom and you can love on them and you can, that's your job. And the second thing is your story is not written yet. Your story is not written. Nobody knows how the story is going to end. Okay. I had somebody tell me when my son was 2, oh, he's never going to do this and he's never going to do that. I laugh, how did they know? He was 2 years old. How do you know that about anybody?
Yeah.
So I tell every parent who I speak to, and I speak to parents all the time who've recently been diagnosed, your story is not written. So there's always a way. You may not know it. You may never have heard about it. I know things now that I didn't know 2 years ago. Your story is not written.
Yeah.
Your story is not written.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. That is great advice. I think we all need to hear that. Even people with typical children.
Absolutely.
There are
this.
typical children. We don't know. We just don't know. And we just have to be hopeful and love our kids and work our asses off to advocate for them.
Absolutely. Advocate, research, make a choice, live with it. And if you have to change your decision, it's fine. We're all on this journey.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your candor. I really appreciate you being here. You're a wonderful asset in our community, and I just appreciate you. So thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and please put your comments on our Facebook page, Two Moms No Fluff, if you have anything to add or if you want to ask Nina anything. And thank you again. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review, and this will allow other people to hear what needs to be heard. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
For more information, please go to www.twomomsnofluff.com. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give it a 5-star rating so more people can hear it. Thank you.